I was standing outside David Richardson's apartment with my hand raised to knock when I realized I needed to stop here for a moment. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. That sterile, carpeted silence you only find in newer buildings where life happens behind closed doors and no one really knows their neighbors. My knuckles hovered an inch from the wood, frozen in place. After 38 years on the force, after standing on doorsteps where blood had already dried and lives had already shattered, this one fell harder than all the others combined. What I saw, what I had already seen, made every muscle in my body go rigid. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Robert Hale. I'm 62 years old. I retired 3 years ago with a clean record, a pension I earned the hard way, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who solved his share of murders. I've been married to Margaret for 35 years. We raised 2 kids, argued about money and paint colors, learned each other's habits until they felt permanent. I believed I understood deception. I just never imagined I was looking straight past it at home. IT started on a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary day that never warns you about to split your life clean in two that Bailey needed his walk. He always does. Our golden retriever is 10 now, a little slower, but still determined to follow the same route every morning. Margaret was already gone. She'd mentioned book club over breakfast. Something about discussing The Great Gatsby at Elaine's place. I nodded, distracted, flipping to the paper like I always did. Outside, the air smelled like damp concrete and fresh coffee drifting from the cafe on 3rd Street. Bailey tugged at the leash, tail wagging, perfectly content. We rounded the corner, and that's when I saw her. Margaret was sitting by the front window of the coffee shop. She wasn't alone. The man across from her was younger, mid-30s maybe, relaxed, confident in the way men are before life teaches them caution. They sat too close. Her hand rested on his arm. Fingers curled like they'd been there 100 times before. She laughed, and something in my chest went cold. I hadn't heard that laugh in years. Bailey sat down beside me. I didn't tell him to. I didn't move at all. Training took over before emotion could. I memorized the man's face, the way he touched her back when they stood to leave. No wedding ring. I caught the license plate number as they walked past me without seeing me at all. 38 years of being a detective doesn't disappear just because the case is personal. Never confront without evidence. I'd lived by that rule my entire career. I lived by it then. Margaret came home later, cheeks flushed, smelling faintly of espresso. She talked easily about book club, about how The Great Gatsby hit differently this time, about illusion and longing and people pretending to be something they weren't, that we'd had that exact conversation 6 months earlier. That was when it clicked, not because of the coffee shop, not even because of the lie itself, but because it was a small lie, casual, unnecessary. The kind of lie you tell when the truth has been buried for so long you don't remember where you left it. That night, Margaret fell asleep beside me, breathing steady, one hand resting on my chest like it always had. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every detail I collected without meaning to. Bailey slept at the foot of the bed, paws twitching, chasing something better in his dreams. And somewhere in the dark, I realized a man who could solve murders had just become a man who had to investigate his own life. I didn't confront Margaret. I didn't raise my voice or ask questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. Instead, I did what I'd always done when something didn't add up. I started an investigation. The first call I made was to Tommy Chin. We'd come up together in the department before he went private. Smart, discreet, allergic to drama. When I told him I needed surveillance on my wife, he didn't react. Just asked for a name. David Richardson. I said 2 weeks later. Tommy handed me a folder that felt heavier than it looked. His reports read like case files. Dates, times, locations. Margaret and David meeting at the same coffee shop every Tuesday and Thursday. Lunches that stretched too long. Afternoons disappearing between 2 and 5 p.m. at the Marriott on 7th. Same room floor. Different days. Consistent pattern that I absorb it all without comment. Affair confirmed. Payne filed away for later. Then Tommy cleared his throat. There's more, he said. Margaret had invested money in David's startup. $150,000. My money, our money, transferred in 3 clean installments. That's when the betrayal stopped being personal and started being criminal. I went to the bank the next morning, sat across from a young manager who kept calling me sir while pulling statements I already knew I didn't want to see. Over the last 6 months, $300,000 had been withdrawn from our joint accounts, layered transactions, spread out just enough not to raise automatic flags. IT got worse. There was a line of credit taken out against our house. $200,000. The house we'd paid off 8 years ago. The paperwork was flawless, except for one thing. The signature, I stared at it for a long time. 35 years of signing. My name has a rhythm, pressure points, muscle memory. This wasn't it. It was close, but close doesn't count in forgery. That I felt something shift then. Whatever part of me had still been mourning the marriage went quiet. This wasn't confusion or midlife panic. This was intent. That night, after Margaret fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and picked up her phone. The password was our wedding anniversary, and I didn't react to that either. The messages were all there. David read heart at the top of the screen, like a joke with a punchline I didn't laugh at. Weeks of texts laid out in chronological order. Plans, reassurances, strategy. She talked about divorcing me, about taking everything before I knew what was happening, about how guilty she felt sometimes. David always replied the same way, calm, guiding, patient, telling her she deserved happiness, telling her I'd be fine, telling her his lawyer had reviewed the documents, power of attorney, control, clean exit. One message stopped me cold. I spent 35 years taking care of him, she wrote. It's my turn now. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every document photo. I emailed copies to an encrypted account, then put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. No notifications, no traces, no mistakes. By the time I went to bed, I wasn't a husband trying to understand his wife anymore. I was a detective with a complete case file, and I knew exactly what came next. I told James first. He flew in from Boston that weekend, still wearing his engineer brain like armor. At first, he shook his head, running numbers, asking questions, looking for the explanation that didn't involve his mother dismantling our family. Then I showed him the files, the bank statements, the hotel logs, the signatures. He went quiet by the end of the night. He wasn't asking if it was true anymore. He was asking what came next. Sarah came down from D.C. 2 days later. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She sat at the table, flipped through the evidence, and shifted into lawyer mode so fast it almost scared me. This is solid, she said, but it has to be airtight. For the next month, we kept building. More statements, more timelines. Tommy stayed on David. One night, he recorded Margaret and David at a restaurant, leaning close, laughing about Florida, about how I'd never see it coming. It was a one-party consent state, perfectly legal. Another recording followed, Margaret and David in our living room while I was supposedly out walking Bailey, planning to move, talking about selling the house by the time we were done. This wasn't just a case of IT was unescapable. Margaret called a family dinner. She said it was important, that we all needed to talk. She made pot roast like she used when the kids were young. We sat around the table that once meant safety. She started with Florida. Sunshine, fresh starts. Selling the house. I let her finish. Then I said, David Richardson. The room went still. I slid the folder across the table. Hotel receipts, bank withdrawals, the forged documents, the recordings. Margaret's face drained as each page turned. I deserve happiness, she said finally, voice thin. James spoke before I could. So did Sarah. Years of hurt poured out in minutes. Not yelling, just truth. Then I told her about David .2 bankruptcies. 3 women before her, all older, all financially drained. I told her about the apartment, how I'd gone there, how he'd smiled and called it confusion, how he'd shown me the contract he planned to leave her with once the money ran out. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't been choosing him, she'd been selected. Sarah explained the rest. Fraud, forgery, no alimony, restitution she'd never realistically repay. Margaret broke down, not gracefully, Completely. The divorce was brutal. She walked away with nothing. David's company collapsed within months. She moved into a small apartment and went back to substitute teaching. Most friends didn't follow her. 6 months later, she called and asked if we could talk, if we could fix it. I told her it wasn't a mistake. It was a series of conscious choices. 8 months later, my life was quieter, better. I started seeing Linda, a retired teacher with steady hands and honest eyes. One afternoon, I took the old family photo off the mantel and put her away that I sit on the porch now with Bailey most mornings. I didn't lose my dignity. I finally saw clearly.